I mean, come on, like, people get fired all the time when they've only been on the job for 6 months, 9 months, a year. But BGE is a place where black men consistently get fired for after 8 years, 10 years, 13 years, 20 years on the job over some nonsense. I mean, this doesn't happen in the larger arena of employment unless somebody develops like a drug habit or gets divorced, or there's some outside development that explains why someone who was good enough for 30 years suddenly got fired. It just doesn't happen. But it happens at BGE because black people get fired for complaining about objectively unacceptable racist behavior. And the white people who are doing the objectively racist behavior don't get fired.
It's evident that he cares. What do you care about? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show.
Greetings, beloved. I am Rock Newman. Thank you so much once again for tuning in to the Rock Newman Show 2.0. Let me say that I want to introduce and frame the subject matter that my next guest is dealing with and that we are talking about today this way. Just give me a moment. So years ago, I had several consulting jobs. One of them dealt with the area of diversity and inclusion and whether or not a major corporation had good practices or were they discriminatory. So I got into that area. And I've never been one that have been accused of not being somewhat aggressive and speaking my mind and speaking truth to power. As those of you who are regular viewers of the Rock Newman Show 2.0, you frequently hear me say, we speak truth to power. No matter who it is, no matter what it is, we speak truth to power. To the best of our ability, we speak truth. So what I learned in that consulting corporate world was some things that gave me real heartburn, where I would notice corporations who really gave lip service to equality, but didn't mean it at all. Some of the ways that they took cover was absolutely disgusting. You'd have white management, white leadership, white control, and too often I would observe how they treated people of color that I knew was discriminatory, that I knew was unfair. They were able to get away with it in part because they would hire blacks to give them cover. They would hire a spook to sit by the door to defend them. I come out of the world of boxing. They would hire a black person to put a jab in the face of any lawyer or any complainant who was accusing them accurately, fairly, truthfully accusing them of discrimination. I noticed it up close. I observed it over a matter of years. One of the quintessential lessons that I learned came from a major casino operator that had facilities all over the world. I was consulting for that facility. After a bit of time, they really started to more live their mission. I was pleased and proud of the role that I thought I played in helping them get to that more fair and equitable practice. Before too long, after I was with them about 14 months, consulting for them for about 14 months, they were taken over by another conglomerate, and very shortly after the takeover was concluded, they brought in someone, a black gentleman, professional. They brought in this man, and the sole purpose, it seemed to me, was for him to defend the company, for him to give the company cover. I watched up close and personal how he deflected every issue that came to him that was smacking of some kind of legitimate discrimination. I've had other opportunities to observe the corporate world. So I'm doing this show here today to, one, single out a lawsuit that is taking place in the Baltimore, Washington area. There are multiple challenges, there are multiple complainants, and they have found someone, an advocate, who is unafraid of the corporate giants, who will speak her truth to their power. Now, as I sit here, I think it's worthy of me to say this. I am not judge and jury, and I invite the company in question. I extend an invitation that if they want to challenge anything that I say here today, if they want to challenge anything that my guest says, please, I am very, very easy to find, and I welcome you to challenge, to rebut, to deny, whatever. But like I want to do with today's guest is I want to know about the possibility of receipts, and I want to know why she so fervently believes in this case. And I will ask her and try to get to the bottom of that. If you come on, you be ready to be interrogated also. And I think that's only fair if you want to try to clear your name. So it's responsible of me, I think, to give you that opportunity since you're not here today. Without further ado, I want to introduce today's guest. She is a Harvard-educated, Stanford-educated attorney. She got an undergraduate from Harvard. She got her got her law degree from Stanford, and she's been challenging and fighting these kind of cases for several years now. My guest today is Tonya Baña. Is that said well
right,
enough? Was that
right.
close? Welcome to the Rock Newman Show 2.0.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you for-
Thank you for shining a light on the issues that we're going to discuss today.
Okay, so you know what? What I'd like to do, to get into this, I said you were Harvard and Stanford educated. Give us a little bit about your background. Who are you? Where did you grow up?
Okay. Well, I grew up just down the road in Baltimore. Public school educated, Woodlawn High School graduate, before going to Harvard undergrad and Stanford Law, as you noted.
She's a Baltimore lady.
That's
Baltimore
right,
girl.
I can fight. I'm the first generation in my family to graduate from college. So, I had a lot of debt, and so my first several jobs out of law school were with firms. I worked for big firms in Baltimore and DC. I was fortunate enough to work for one of the best known and most reputable employment practices worldwide, the labor and employment practice of Jones Day, where I got a lot of experience handling bet the company complex litigation matters involving employment claims. And so I basically represented companies for a decade, the first decade of my career. I would be remiss if I didn't note that I started my career by clerking for the Chief Judge of Maryland, Robert Mack Bell, which was one of the best experiences of my career, to have the honor and the privilege to work with Judge Bell, because he is someone who lives the values that we're going to be talking about today, and someone who remains a big inspiration for the choices that I make in my career. After the first decade, essentially, of my career, I started my own practice representing workers in employment-related matters. Most people in the legal field would call me an employment lawyer. I think that kind of minimizes unfairly the value and the impact of what I do. I consider what I do human rights advocacy, and I consider myself a civil rights attorney, because equal opportunities with respect to employment is one of the main pillars of equality in America. Education, safe and fair housing, employment. You can't have any of those other things if you don't have the resources to provide for your family. And of course, the way that we do that is through employment. And as long as we have persistent and pervasive inequity in employment, we will continue to lag behind. People of color will continue to lag behind. Women will continue to earn 60 cents on the dollar for what men earn. So that's why I do what I do.
Okay, so I also want to just acknowledge something that may not need to be acknowledged, but there's such a long history of in-your-face, subtle, behind the scenes, and every other adjective that you might be able to describe discrimination. Someone asked me recently, I made a subject about something, I said, because a white guy did something, if the black guy had done it, there'd be an outcry. So, and a guy asked me, well, what does race have to do with this? Right. And I said everything. Right. Because it does, and it has everything to do pretty much with everything. So I wanted to get that out. So
it's a good segue to what we're talking about today, because the case that you alluded to, which is a potential class action that I'm pursuing against the Baltimore Gas Electric Company, its parent company, Exelon Corporation, and another affiliated company called Exelon Business Services Company, which is really a professional services outfit that they use to employ the lawyers and the HR people who really advise them and handle compliance for all of their utilities. At this point, there are 17 plaintiffs in the case, all black men, all utility workers who either work for BGE now or formerly worked for BGE, and have all raised disturbingly similar allegations of hostile work environment and pervasive disparate treatment with respect to promotions, assignments, opportunities for advancement, and in particular discipline. And so people say, what does race have to do with it? It's America. It taints everything that we do. It impacts everything, and if you're not looking at outcomes and taking that into account, then you're missing a big part of the story. The really noteworthy thing about the BGE case is how striking and shocking the disparities are. It's the only reason we could pursue this case and have a chance at being successful is because this is so egregious. They can't even pretend that they're trying to be fair. When you have a black man who's fired because he was away from the job for 2 hours because he didn't have any work and he went to the barbershop, and then you have a white man who for years has been, while he's supposed to be out on the job inspecting job sites, he's been on his boat. He's been on his boat. Let me say that again.
Yeah.
And then after spending several hours a day on his boat, then goes out in the field and claims overtime. For years. And that man still works there right now. So these are the types of egregious disparities we're talking about. that persist. And they, the thing is, and let me be clear, when the first of my clients first came to me, I told them we can't win. You can't win wrongful discharge cases. It's just because the bar is relatively low for the company.
And the deck is stacked.
Absolutely, the deck is stacked.
Right.
But the bar is low. If they articulate what appears to be a legitimate reason for your termination, that's usually the end of the matter. It's only because we're able to show patterns, persistent patterns, where human resources and management are very much aware of the fact that Black employees are being strictly held responsible for compliance with policies, but white people get second and third and fourth chances. That's what we're able to show and shine a light on in this case. And I don't think that they're unusual. I certainly think that the Exelon companies are among the worst offenders I've ever seen, but I don't think that they're unusual within their industry. And I think there are many industries like the power industry where these pervasive kind of disparities in treatment along racial lines persist and will continue unless more lawyers get involved and hold these employers accountable for the policies that they have. They all have the right policies that say that they're fair and equitable. They just don't follow them.
I want to give this acknowledgement also. And really say something that most people sitting in my seat probably would not say. But I have a bias. I have a bias about this because I gave an example of, specific example that I was a part of a few years ago. Many years before that, I saw something happen. My father was a truck driver. He was a cement truck driver. He worked for Super Concrete, which was a white-owned company in Washington, D.C. And they had a policy that said that you had to, whoever had the most seniority as a driver had the choice of becoming a shop steward if they wanted. Some people didn't. Some people wanted to just keep driving. Some people wanted to be a shop steward and get that kind of experience. So it came time, and so my father was a cement truck driver at that company, and so were four of my brothers. My oldest brother, who's probably smarter than all of us, he was driving the truck and he had his eye on that shop steward situation. He had an impeccable record as a driver for that company. And it came time for him to be moved into the shop steward position. Some white guy with much less seniority got that position.
Of course.
My older brother, very much not a radical, not a complainer. He goes along to get along. His feelings were hurt.
Sure.
He knew what happened. He knew that was his to get. He said, I'll get it next time. And then he didn't get it the next time. Then he didn't get it the next time. Then on the fourth time, the person behind him with a year, couple of years, as I remember it, less seniority, got it. He made a decision to quit. Made it, didn't raise hell, made a decision to quit. And what he did was he went out and he got a job as a salesperson at the Mack Truck Corporation. And he blew, the people who were there were selling, he blew them away. He blew them away. He became manager. Now, there was a difference. He did not acknowledge to the Mack Truck ownership that he was black, and they did not know because of we have about the same color and about the same features. They didn't know. In effect, he was passing without saying, I'm passing. So they made him the general manager of the company. He was rocking and rolling. Very, very much a spendthrift, had been saving his money all his life. He decided that he wanted to run his own concrete company. He put funds together, and with the support and help of Marion Barry and his administration, very progressive administration, got the funds to start his own concrete company. He called it what? Opportunity Concrete. And what he did, at one point they had like 48 employees. 46 were black. So I know the trauma that he went through to get that position. So it gives me a particular bias. With what I have seen, it gives me a particular bias. So when I became aware of this story, I very much wanted to highlight the particular claim that you're making against this particular company, because it is a microcosm of what happens in America. In corporate America is something we have to fight against all the time. Now, let's get into, again, you mentioned them, but let's get into the claims and what you say are the merits of this case.
Well, you know, the first gentleman who came to me, his name is Kevin Alston, and the case has his name. We initially filed on behalf of Kevin before we added in all of the other claims and the putative class claims. But Kevin came to me, had to be at least 3 times to get me to represent him, and I kept turning him away. And you know, I said to, because at that time I was charging for initial consultations, and I said, look, you know, you lost your job. I don't want to take your money when I'm not going to be able to help you. You know, discipline cases are impossible to win. You're telling me that they claim that you got fired for not going to a job. You're telling me that they fired you. They claim that you, you know, submitted your commute time for reimbursement when you shouldn't have. You know, on the face of it, those seem like legitimate explanations that would be grounds for termination. It's just impossible. He just kept coming back to me. And you know, what he told me from the beginning that I found difficult to believe and now know to be true, well, now believe to be true based on the evidence I've seen, given the patterns, is that he never had a chance to be successful there, because early in his career, and I should back up, Kevin was a contractor for BGE before he actually got into the company. And it's very competitive. It's very difficult to get these jobs. These are jobs where you can earn good 6-figure salaries with no college degree. With overtime, you can be bringing home $200,000. They're among the last of the really good blue-collar 6-figure jobs, and they're jobs that, you know, traditionally have gone to white people. And so if you can get on, like it's like winning the lottery. It's like getting a good government job. And we're always going to need power. The nature of the power may change, but we're always going to need it. And so he'd worked for a contractor for years and applied several times. Finally gets into the utility training program. And from the beginning, he experienced differential treatment from his trainers. But really, what sabotaged his career is the fact that after classroom training, and this is kind of, you know, this is how most people in the utility worker ranks get into the industry. You have an initial kind of classroom training, and then you have on the job field training, where you work with a more experienced person in the role that you're going to be taking on. And so his on the job training, he was assigned to work with a gentleman named Keith Nizer, long-standing, experienced gas mechanic, and they were going to a job one day, and Mr. Nizer got into a dispute with some gentleman in another vehicle in traffic. The gentleman happened to be black, and he exclaimed in his outrage at this dispute, "I hate fucking niggers," in front of Kevin. The gas mechanic job is really all utility worker positions are safety sensitive positions. You're working with electricity, you're working with gas, you're working with heavy equipment. People die, people get electrocuted, you know, people get suffocated, they have cave-ins. I mean, it really is not hyperbole to say that it's safety sensitive. And besides the fact that he was troubled that his coworker would so casually use the N-word in his presence, he also just didn't feel safe working with this guy who obviously had little regard for people of color. So he,
Because then you're going to work. If you hear somebody say that, then you're going to work to say what he said. You got to be worried about whether or not you're going to get set up by this guy.
Is this person going to be there to have my back when I need someone to do something that protects me, that keeps me safe?
Yeah.
Is what he's telling me correct? Is what he's instructing me to do, how he's instructing me to do the job? And by the way, the feedback, I've interviewed scores of people, in excess of 80 people to file this case, which is very unusual.
Yeah.
This is the most fact investigation I've ever done for any case that I've ever brought, because I knew I had to have receipts, like you said earlier, if I was going to have any chance of success.
Right.
And so, Kevin, I guess this incident happened on a Friday. Kevin went home and just pondered it and worried about it all weekend. And he comes in the next week and he goes to his supervisor and he tells his supervisor what happened. And he's very clear. I don't want to get the guy fired. I just don't want to work with him.
Yeah.
I don't want to, I want to be assigned to someone else. The supervisor, obviously not believing him. I mean, the supervisor had an obligation under the company policies to report the incident to HR.
Yeah.
But, they do everything halfway right. They bring in HR, who interviews him. She comes into the job site, which HR being there is noted. Everybody can see that the HR lady, who's not usually there, is there. She pulls him in, and interviews him. So now everybody sees that he's the source of why HR is there. Apparently, the gentleman, although this should have been a terminable offense, you would think, given all of the company's publicity and PR and brand marketing about how much they love Black people and brown people and bi people and trans people.
If you're just tuning in, we're talking. She referred to BG&E. That's Baltimore Gas and Electric, which is a subsidiary of Exelon.
Of Exelon,
Okay.
wholly owned subsidiary.
Yeah.
By all outward appearances, you would think that this is an idyllic workplace with respect to equity and inclusion issues, and it
Given their marketing approach.
Yes, and their policies. It would seem to me that would be a terminable offense, particularly given the evidence that we have, which suggests that this was not a first-time offense for this gentleman, that he had a history of making anti-Semitic comments that had been reported. But he wasn't discharged. I guess there was some temporary penalty that impacted his pay, but he wasn't discharged. But from that point forward, even though Kevin specifically said, I'm not trying to get the guy fired, he was blamed for that incident being reported. He was blamed for the disciplinary action that was taken against his, white superior. And from that point forward, the white people spread rumors that he was sneaky, dishonest, lazy, couldn't be trusted. And from that point forward, his career was really doomed. At his next job assignment, he was given kind of the worst on-the-job trainer who would deliberately give him inaccurate information. He felt very strongly that he wasn't getting the quality of training that his peers were getting. And ultimately, his career is cut short when he is discharged for supposedly not going to a job site. I'll tell you in a minute why that doesn't make sense. And for, improperly submitting his commute time, which is not compensable. I have seen the text messages that he exchanged with the union. The union verified that the dispatcher who assigned him his work verified that Kevin wasn't released until a certain time. And so the time that he submitted was the time until he was released by dispatch to go home. That is what you're supposed to do. And his job was a gas emergency response. You can't not go to a job that's a gas emergency response job. Either you went or you didn't go. So this idea that he didn't go is preposterous. When they met with him to have an investigation about these incidents, he told them, I have proof. I have records from my Garmin GPS showing where I went. I'm sure the dispatcher will back up that when I was released. They didn't care. They didn't want to hear it. They fired him. The company supposedly has a progressive discipline policy. They didn't follow that. And he was summarily walked out and given a trash bag to put his personal effects in. It was devastating to him. These experiences have been devastating to all of my clients, to go from being, an admired person in the community who has a good job, who people look up to, who is easily able to support your family, to not only not having a job, but people immediately think you must have done something real bad to mess up that good job.
Yeah.
But also, you can't, one of the things that is especially damaging about their practices is that if you are involuntarily discharged for cause, you are then banned from working for any of their utilities, which means because they are the biggest power conglomerate, utility operator in the country, and especially here in the Mid-Atlantic, you are basically locked out of working for any of the utility
For them to
companies.
apply the experience that you had
Correct.
to earn a living,
Right.
they're able to shut that down.
They shut it down. So you can't work on BGE's system, which means you can't work for the contractors who do, they have lots of contractors who do work for them. And you would probably be, under all normal circumstances, be able to get a job the next day. Because the contractors need people. They want people who have the experience of working inside the company. But you can't go out and get those jobs because you're banned. And you're banned from working for BGE, which covers most of Maryland. You're banned from working for Delmarva Power, which is Southern Maryland. PEPCO, which, as you know, is Howard and this part, and parts of DC.
Part of Maryland.
You're banned from Atlantic Power, company. It's something. It's ACE. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. You're banned from PECO, which is Pennsylvania, and also ComEd. It covers pretty much the entirety of the Mid-Atlantic. You're going to have to go to Virginia, West Virginia. Maybe DC if you can get on with DC.
Okay, so he convinced you that he had a case that was worth fighting for.
Well, I'm not going to take that credit. I will tell you that the universe convinced me, because at the same time that I was looking at his case and trying to pursue something on his behalf, another person came to me who had an identical experience. See, when Kevin told me that his termination was tied to him reporting the N-word by his coworker, it didn't seem to make sense to me, because it had taken 2 years. Like, there was a 2-year gap. What I didn't know is that's how long it takes for them to get you, right? I didn't know that.
Right.
And in the law typically says that if there's going to be a causal connection between protected activity and some kind of adverse consequences, we usually expect to see it happen pretty soon, like within a couple of months. Okay. Usually the law is going to say, hey, there's not really an inference of a connection when there's that much separation. But in this context, an 18-month or 2-year gap, it makes perfect sense. It is, there needs to be some specific cause, and they set you up. It takes time for them to set you up. And they also are smart enough to know not to do it right away when you report something that is objectively egregious. And so it just happened that I was talking to Kevin when another gentleman came to me, a team lead, who had an identical experience in terms of reporting something and having it destroy his career, and then being targeted for false accusations, trumped up, exaggerated allegations of misconduct, and then being fired for something that white people do all the time. It was seeing those two experiences and the identical kind of nature of the timeline that made me realize, wait a minute, I need to look at this more closely. And so then, in the context of having those two gentlemen, their experiences, I was able to interview dozens of people who, I very quickly gathered that these were not unique experiences at all. This was a pattern.
So
BGE is the only place I've ever seen, an Exelon, where you can work for a place for 30 years and get fired over some bullshit. I mean, come on, people get fired all the time when they've only been on the job for 6 months, 9 months, a year. But BGE is a place where black men consistently get fired for after 8 years, 10 years, 13 years, 20 years on the job over some nonsense. I mean, this doesn't happen in the larger arena of employment unless somebody develops like a drug habit or gets divorced, or there's some outside development that explains why someone who was good enough for 30 years suddenly got fired. It just doesn't happen. But it happens at BGE because black people get fired for complaining about objectively unacceptable racist behavior. And the white people who are doing the objectively racist behavior don't get fired, even though the company's policies would seem to suggest that that's what's supposed to happen.
If BG&E, except what is, I want you to know, if any BG&E reps are looking in here, it's a sincere invitation for you to come and sit at this table and to discuss your position, to challenge whatever Tanya might be saying. So I make an assumption in the research that I've done in trying to prepare for today's interview. BG&E, Baltimore Gas and Electric, has touted their diversity competence, their willingness to be a firm of equality for everyone, and they have loudly shouted that they hired a black person to become, was the president or CEO or both, and that is someone named, is it Calvin Butler?
Yeah, Calvin Butler was the first African-American CEO of BGE. I think he took that role in 2014, and he became the COO, I think, of Exelon in, I want to say 2019, and he is now the big boss. He is, the buck stops with him completely. He is the CEO of Exelon, of Exelon now.
And you would, has it been your experience since you've been doing these interviews and researching this matter that he has made a difference in terms of eliminating some of the discriminatory practices, or has he behaved like the person that I talked about at the onset of this show, that was put in a position to defend master?
What I will tell you is what is in the complaint and what is public information in the papers we filed and that are public information with, on file with the court. Some of which has been admitted to by BG and Exelon. Mr. Lee, who I talked about, Mr. Lee reported a noose tying demonstration.
A what?
Noose tying demonstration. So a Team Lee, I told you that the reason I really started looking at this is because there was this parallel experiences between Kevin Alston and Team Lee. Kevin Alston reported his coworker using the N-word. Mr. Lee reported his trainer conducting a noose tying demonstration. This was in initial utility training. Mr. Lee was the only black trainee in his training class. I think there were five white guys in the class and Mr. Lee. And the head trainer that handled electrical training conducted a noose tying demonstration. He taught the trainees how to tie a noose. He talked about the history of nooses and how they were used to kill black people. Mr. Lee is no.
This is he was talking about. I want to be real clear on that. I understand this.
Yep.
So there was a noose.
It's unbelievable.
It's a noose tying demonstration.
Yeah.
And he talks about how the noose was used to kill black people.
He talked about the history.
Has there been any example of why that was relevant, why he did that?
Absolutely not. In fact, it's undisputed. I mean, the Exelon companies have confirmed that there is no legitimate business reason why anybody would be teaching anybody how to tie a noose in the workplace. A simple slip knot is it not that is used in utility work, but there's no confusing a simple slip knot with a noose. The noose has a very distinctive wrap, collection of wraps, which is what marks it as a noose and makes it so recognizable. And that is what this gentleman showed. So it was a class.
It was a class where that was done. The multiple people.
I don't believe there was actively an active class going on. There's mixed information about whether this was between classes or after class or after they had gone to lunch and had come back. But what is undisputed is that this occurred in the workplace and this occurred in a trailer on BGE's premises. That this was done by a senior trainer. And that he talked about the history of nooses and how they were used historically. And my client, Mr. Lee, he's not an easily intimidated person. And so his response was to point out that if slaves were strong enough that they could lift themselves up out of the noose and free themselves. And the trainer, his name is Joseph Belge, the gentleman who did the noose demonstration, his response was to say, well, that's why they greased the rope. They greased the rope.
So, again, in preparation for this, we did a little research, and we came upon the gentleman that you're speaking of. What's his name? With the rope.
Joseph Belge.
And we saw the noose. It was.
He was grinning.
It was very, very chilling. It was very, very chilling.
He was posing.
So, one can only imagine, just seeing a photo of that, what the traumatic effect must have been.
It's true. I'm getting tears in my eyes talking about it right now. I can't. The sort of what would possess someone to want to terrorize someone, to want to make someone uncomfortable when they are new to the organization? And of course, that's the reason, right? Like this was by design. This is an intentional act to let you know you're not welcome here. Like this is ours.
Okay, so that happened. That happened.
But let's be clear, the pictures that are floating around on social media are from a different time.
Okay.
So he did this to my client, Mr. Lee, in 2018. There are pictures showing that he did this in 2016. He did it to two of my other clients, Marcus Ragsdale
Were
and
they
Quentin
report?
Pearson.
Did your other clients report him, or did
No.
they didn't
No.
report him?
No, they didn't report him. This was one of many incidents that they experienced in training that was aggressively hostile on the basis of race. They observed the comfort with which he behaved this way, along with other things that they observed in the larger culture of the company, and they were fearful of retaliation. It's just that simple. They were afraid that they would lose their jobs if they reported it, and of course, we know from Mr. Lee's experience that was a reasonable fear to have, because Mr. Lee was targeted after he reported that noose incident, even though there was an investigation that confirmed that he conducted a demonstration, that other trainees actually tied nooses or the beginnings of nooses under this employee's direction. The man was written up. Again, there was a temporary reduction in pay, but he kept his job. And Mr. Lee was targeted as a snitch after that.
So Tanya, again, part of the reason I want to do this is because you have to be asleep and buried not to know about discrimination in corporate America. This is, again, I see it as a microcosm. Do you have any other examples of some of their, discriminatory behavior?
How much time do you have? I mean, I think that one of the reasons that I, wanted to be here today to talk about this subject is because I feel like it is important for the general public to know. And this is not something I'm saying based simply on the BGE case, news case.
Yeah.
I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
I've been representing individuals for, at least a decade. And first of all, anybody who thinks that this is a post-racial America and that, racism is not that big of a deal because there are a lot of prominent individual black people who've achieved significant and exceptional things. They think that racism is over because of that are mistaken. Racism is as bad and as pervasive as it's been in my lifetime, certainly. And it has real serious consequences with respect to the lifetime earning capacity and career opportunities for black people especially. And it has a significant impact on health. It has a real impact on health. This is not petty. This is not just words that are offensive. It causes trauma. It causes depression. It causes hypertension, stomach ailments, Crohn's disease. There's a litany of real physical and mental health conditions that are tied to the trauma that especially black people, but people of color in general, continue to experience in the workplace. And it is not just confined to the power industry. It is fairly commonplace.
This, what I'm getting ready to say here, I've said before, but I think it bears repeating. I was with a classmate last year, and he's a very high-ranking person in the medical industry. And on his job, he's at his job. It's an advocacy group, and he's a high-ranking official. And I casually called him up before I was leaving North Carolina and said, "Hey man, what are you doing this evening? You want to go out and grab something?" He said, "Nah, Rock, I'm a lay low." He said, I'm just here at the crib trying to get my head right to go deal with these white folks tomorrow." And he said it very casually, in a very cavalier kind of way.
Yeah.
But I thought about that as to what black people have to do. Here's a high-ranking, highly accomplished, very educated, one of the, oh my God, he in college and today, one of the best dressed, dapper brothers you'll ever see. Not a troublemaker, don't wave red, black, and green flags or none of that. Just as tried to do the right thing, played the game the way they suggest you play the game. But what they don't know and what they don't understand, and I think what they don't care about, is when you make that kind of statement, you make that statement from a place of trauma.
Right.
I got to get my head right, which is something that they never have to think about, that white folks never ever have to think about. So when it comes to the issues of high blood pressure and all kinds of medical maladies that happen, you wonder, oh, well, how come black people have this going on? How come black folks have that going?
People should be asking, how come we aren't more upset? How come we aren't going off the handle more, given what we have to carry? I mean, I said ultimately that I was going to pursue this as a class action because I will not have one more black father come to me for help and sit in my office and cry like a baby as they have to sit there and describe to me not being able to provide for their family, having to pull their children out of private school over some bullshit, over something petty, because they complained about something that was legitimate. And the things like the N-word and nooses get a lot of attention from the public. But the bigger concern for me is the systemic disparities with respect to promotional opportunities and discipline. I'll give you another example from our case. Marcus Ragsdale and Trelane Hill. Marcus had been at the company 8 years, perfectly good performance reviews, above average, fully performing. Trelane Hill, 30-year employee. They were dispatched to a piece of equipment that had malfunctioned. The equipment malfunctioned again while they were on site. It caused a power outage that impacted 1,200 employees. The company, even though equipment malfunctions or misoperations, as they call them in the industry, are common. They happen all the time. Other people on their teams had experienced misoperations within the prior year and had not been accused of incompetence or dishonesty. But these two black men were accused of incompetence and dishonesty. And this is how stupid it is, right? They were accused of tampering with the equipment to cover up that they had messed up something, but they were accused, like the way that they supposedly tampered with the equipment is something that you'd have to be an expert to do. So it's like, okay, they were dumb enough to make the equipment malfunction, but smart enough to try to cover it up in some way that only a subject matter expert would know how to do. It's ludicrous. But this is the mental gymnastics that management and HR go through to assume that if a black person does something, it has to be dishonest due to dishonesty or incompetence, when white people routinely get the benefit of the doubt. Oh, equipment malfunction, no worries, not even investigated. Not investigated, not fired. These men were fired, and not just for incompetence, for lying and being dishonest during the company investigation. And what's really crazy is they had people on their team, the subject matter expert on their team said, yeah, this was an equipment malfunction. But management and HR bent over backwards to come up with some convoluted theory as to how they had caused a defective piece of equipment to misoperate again and fired them. It's crazy.
Black folks, we have a full-time job. Being black is a full-time job. And you just described all of what you described, which is logical, quite plausible, especially if you're black, in knowing that this is a reality. But too often, we go before a white judge who doesn't have the same understanding and can't have the same understanding. Therefore, because sometimes the letter of the law doesn't serve you justice. I ain't a lawyer or a law professor, but I know that if you don't have and you don't understand some of the nuance of what you're talking about and its impact on the individual and then the community, well, you kind of see it as like you got this in writing here and you got this in writing, and too often we don't get justice as a result of who's sitting there meting out the so-called justice. So
can I just I'll just push back a little bit.
Do.
I won't disagree that there is not enough representation on the bench with respect to race or gender, for sure. And more often than not, my clients will find themselves in front of a judge who doesn't look like them. But first and foremost, I as an attorney have to do my job in putting the information in front of the judge. And what I have found is, BG and Exelon, they've gotten away with, this isn't the first time they've been accused of race discrimination. They get accused of race discrimination by black former employees. It's a perennial thing, at least every other year or so. They routinely get away with it. The cases are dismissed or they get summary judgment. But I hold the lawyers accountable because they need to put the evidence there. Yeah. And that's why I spent over a year investigating the allegations in this case, talking to dozens and dozens of witnesses, corroborating what people told me, cross-referencing what I heard from witnesses, getting them to identify others who could substantiate what they were saying, collecting documents. How
many people are you now representing in this lawsuit?
There are 17 plaintiffs in the case. There are, originally the case was filed on behalf of Mr. Alston. We then added another 6 to the case when we first added class claims. The class claims are on behalf of ex-BGE employees who have been banned from working and who have basically been locked out of the utility industry in this region because of their having been terminated by BGE. And we believe that in every case for those individuals that we can show that they shouldn't have been fired. They were fired under circumstances where white people are not fired. And we believe that the patterns will show that there is a huge disproportionate application of their disciplinary policies and procedures. And ironically, the Exelon companies have all these policies that are supposed to limit discretion and ostensibly require management to be fair, but they don't actually get applied fairly. And there is discretion for local management to kind of ignore those policies. And so what ends up happening is that the rules are really only strictly applied to black people. And I feel like they have a drug and alcohol policy, which is a perfect example. A number of my clients were impacted by the drug and alcohol policy. Several of them for using medical marijuana that they actually disclosed to the company. Malik Smith is the best example. This is a gentleman who worked for the company for 13 years. He's on the cover of BG magazine, I think twice. He was an outstanding employee. And he had a supervisor, a white woman supervisor, who had a pattern of being disrespectful, dismissive to her black subordinates. And Mr. Smith told his supervisor that he was going to report her behavior. to her new supervisor, and right after that, he was sent for a DOT drug and alcohol test that revealed, which should not have been a surprise, trace amounts of marijuana.
Yeah.
They knew he was taking medical marijuana. He had a catastrophic car accident, was out for several months. They fired him anyway. A white colleague of his actually tested positive for opiates. Once he explained that he was taking that for cancer treatment, it was a non-issue.
What's the status of the case right now?
The status of the case is we are in the midst of discovery. We're actually about to file another amended complaint, adding in additional details, specifically additional evidence that we've uncovered that supports the allegations we've made about an ongoing cover-up of the racist practices at the company, and specifically there has been, we allege, an ongoing conspiracy to cover up the truth of the noose behavior, because the gentleman who was tying nooses was doing it for years. And we had a deposition just this week where a witness testified. This was an internal investigator for Exelon, did an investigation in the winter of 2020, and that investigation confirmed what my clients have been saying and what we've continued to say, which is that this man was tying nooses and terrorizing trainees for decades. Her words in deposition, her testimony is, it was common knowledge that he was doing this. And of course, he was photographed doing it in 2016. It was reported. Mr. Smith had the same experience. Malik Smith had the experience in 2006 or 7. He reported it. The man wasn't fired then. He wasn't fired in 2018. When the pictures became public, then they fired him. And so what it clearly shows is they don't have a policy that prohibits nooses. They have a policy that prohibits getting caught with pictures tying nooses. That's really their zero tolerance policy. It's a zero tolerance for bad publicity. And since then, they have, not only to other employees, but in statements to the government and in public statements to the media and in statements to the court in this case, they have led the world to believe that picture and the behavior in that picture was an isolated incident that happened one time. And that's a lie. And they've known that that's a lie since at least November, December of 2020. And given that it was common knowledge that he was tying nooses, and the Vice President of Human Resources' husband was one of the people who say, yeah, everybody knows he's been tying nooses for years. It shows that they are deliberately lying to the world because they got caught. They got caught with, on the one hand, their branding and marketing says we are industry leaders, but the reality there is very, very different.
What outcome would be satisfactory to you?
Well, first of all, let me say, that is up to a Baltimore City jury to decide. A Baltimore City jury will decide, what if anything should be given to my clients to compensate them, if in fact the jury concludes that the defendants are liable for what we've alleged. Personally, I don't think that there's any amount that is adequate. So, I could give you a number, but my number would sound crazy because I don't think that you can put a price on what my clients have described to me and what I've witnessed that they've experienced. But one thing I do not want to get lost in this is, and BG and Exelon are not alone in this, big companies pretend that this is such a hard thing to fix, that, fixing hearts and minds and getting people educated on equity is so hard. It's so hard. It's not hard. Because you know what? If the first time this man tied a noose, they fired his ass, people would learn you can't tie nooses. If the first time somebody white used the N-word in the workplace, they got fired, they would stop using the N-word. These behaviors persist because they know there isn't a zero tolerance policy. In fact, it is a culture of tolerance. And that's why they feel comfortable doing it, because they know they're going to get a smack on the wrist if anything, if it actually is reported that they've been engaged in these behaviors. So what I'm looking for is, I'm looking for this to stop because it's harmful. It does real harm to black families and communities when you're locking people out of an industry, when you're locking people from specific communities out of an industry that is the type of industry that allows people to lift their families up. It needs to stop. and they need to be held accountable for it, and they need to be honest and genuinely contrite and committed to being better going forward.
What say you, BG and E? I think I want to, we're at the end here, but I want to do a disclaimer. And that is, I met Tanya when I took some friends to her who seemed to have a serious workplace complaint. And they were talking about, their desire and what they thought that the company would give them, would owe them gazillions of dollars. And I kind of believed in, I believed in their cause from my perspective, a non-lawyer, but seasoned business person perspective. And what Tanya did is she said she didn't want to take the case because as she looked at it, she didn't feel as if it was a case that was worthy of pursuing. So she rejected my advance, if you will. Out of that, I developed a really great sense of respect for her and kind of have followed her trajectory. And one thing I can say, like I said in the beginning, I am no judge or jury for this matter. I'm biased, but I don't pretend to really know what the outcome should be. That's left for others. But what I do know is that this lady here is a fierce fighter to protect the interests of our community. And I'll say this: if I have a case that I want to bring, I can't tell you what to do. If I ever have a case like this that I want to bring, that I'm real serious about and kind of know that I'm right about, I'm gonna take it to this lady right here, Tanya Baña. Thank you so much for joining Rock Newman Show 2.0 today.
Thank you.
God bless you. Folks, that wraps us right here, and I'm going to see you the next time. God bless you.